Hello, everyone. So let's start. My name is Nicolas Grekas. I'm from Paris, and I work at the Symfony, at Sensio Labs. I used to work for Blackfire, so I can show you Blackfire later if you want. And I'm doing pull requests on Symfony almost every day, and I'm working on the next version of Symfony almost daily, and a few other things around Symfony, running conferences also, and running a Symfony Cloud, which is a hosting platform we are building to host Symfony applications. Okay, so I'm involved a lot in the Symfony community. Today we're going to talk about Symfony 4 and the best practices you maybe should use when doing Symfony 4. I'd like this to be interactive, so today is about sharing our experience, sharing my experience with you, but also sharing the experience together. So please talk together, please ask questions. It should really be interactive. I want you to learn as much as you can, me to give you as much as I can from my experience. So this will happen only by asking questions, okay? So just do it, really. So we have best practices. The most important thing that I want to start to tell about best practices is that there is no gold rule in programming. It doesn't exist, so best practice doesn't exist in abstract term. It's just something at some point in the time that a group of people agrees and says, okay, we think this way of doing things is better than other ways in general context. It means if you have a more specific use case, maybe you should go out of the best practice we're going to talk about. And another very important thing is that there is almost only one best practice, which is to understand what you're doing. Basically, best practices are about people who have some experience in some topic, and they understand really what it means to do things one way or another way. And that's what the best practice is, understanding and giving the advice to others. So your goal today is to understand why something is better per the recommendation than the other, okay? And the second rule of the best practice is sharing. A best practice is best practice only because it's shared. So best practice is understanding and sharing with a group, with your team, sharing some experience. So maybe that's the only thing you need to understand today and to keep from today is really try to understand why something is done this way. And if you understand why, you'll be able to challenge the best practice and to make it yours. And this is, okay, really important. There is no way I'm able to authoritatively tell you, you must do it this way. This is not what the best practice is. Yeah? So, who already tried Symfony 4? Cool. So we are going to start and to play a bit with Symfony 4 today, starting with creating a small application and trying to use, configuration, creating controllers, and discussing step by step how to make it grow up to a small application. Let's do that. So I first want us to create this small application. I created this one, this URL. You can go, and if you want, you can open it. So it's at this URL. It contains some steps we're going to follow in the morning. So we're going to do that together. So if you can just open this URL. I will use it and it will be on screen. And I will also type into it. So if you want, it should be better. Oops, sorry. I'm leaving it this way. So, is everyone okay? Is everyone at this step? Okay, great. So, let's go. We're going to create an empty application. Okay. So I'm running this command right now. So what we just did is create a project. So you should already have Composer, PHP of course, PHP 7.1. Is everyone okay at this step? Who is not yet? Yeah, do you need help or no? Okay. Just to show you, I want to share some things with you. As part of understanding what is happening and why things are recommended one way or another, I want to show you what happens when we created the project. So the command is composer create project and then some package, Symfony Skeleton, the folder, and I added the verbose mode. So composer is just the package, the dependency resolver of the PHP world. Create project is the base command and it's already shipped by Composer. And then what Composer does when we run this command is that it goes to this Symfony Skeleton package. It downloads it locally, and then it runs automatically Composer update or Composer install actually. This is a very easy way to start a Symfony application. We used to have a recommendation to use something which was called the Symfony installer. So the Symfony installer was something, a command line application that was created to help bootstrap a Symfony application really quickly. This is not the best practice anymore, so this is more standard. The standard is to use Composer and the standard create project command. The way it works is that, let me open it because that just, the source code is here. So you can go there. So github.com symfony/skeleton. And there is only one file. So the starting point of Symfony application now is just one Composer.json file, which is this one. So okay, there is this skeleton, and what this contains is this file, maybe raw. Okay, let's do it this way. So we are starting with the Symfony skeleton. There is type project because it's a project. The license is a MIT. We'll see something just now after that. And then we have just a few dependencies. So there are three dependencies at the PHP level. One is PHP itself, and then we require the ctype and the iconv extensions, which are really low-level extensions that are just needed to run this skeleton. And we just start with the console. with Flex. We're going to talk about Flex later, with a framework bundle, and with YAML. Those are the only 4 mandatory dependencies of a new Symfony application. And of course, these dependencies also have their own dependencies. So in the end, when we resolve this, we are going to have more packages downloaded. So what this means is that we think the minimum application you want to create has a console. That's why we install Symfony console. Has some auto-configuration system, which is what Symfony Flex is doing. Has the framework bundle. So the framework bundle is the minimum set of configuration you can have for a Symfony application. So the framework bundle contains configuration for many core features of any Symfony application. Let's say routing, let's say forms, validation, and so on. So it has caching system, serialization, validation. It contains just the glue to allow you to configure your application. And then we use Symfony YAML to do configuration. So, of course, best practice is to use YAML as a configuration format. There is also .env. So .env is, as you can see, is a package that is required only in development. And this maps to a recommendation, which is to use environment variables to configure the application for the infrastructure part of the application. We're going to talk much about that later. This is new in Symfony 2 and 3. The configuration was done through parameters. It's still done through parameters, but it's also now done through environment variables. And the .env package allows creating environment variables in an easy way using this .env file. I'll show you later. Okay, another thing we have here. For the autoloader, we configure by default the src folder of the application, and we map it to the app namespace. This means your classes in the skeleton should be put in this app namespace. You can change that. I would not recommend it because finding a name is something boring, something difficult. So now you are already in the context of your application, and we are going to use the app namespace for everything we're going to do inside this application. It's easy, and it works well also with some code generation tool we are going to use later. So recommendation, use the app namespace. Unless you need some redistribution, unless you need to share the code and make it reusable, there is no need to care about the namespace and much more, so just use app as a namespace in your application. And that's it for now. We'll see step by step the other things. Do you have any question at this step? Anything? Yeah? Okay, let me show you also this output. Quickly, just so you know what happens. Who already looked at this kind of output? Okay. So, for the other, when composer starts, it reads some local configuration. Okay, I don't have anything special there. Let me jump to the part where okay, this part is the interesting part. So, the previous step were not that interesting.
Yeah, actually, because it was 2 lines higher. It says load plugin Symfony Flex. How is this loaded and why?
This one?
Yeah. How is that loaded and when?
Okay, so the reason is that my setup has Symfony Flex installed as a global package. Yes. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. And, okay, let me tell you why later, okay? So I do have, if you're right, I do have two plugins which are installed locally as global package, so they are always there on any project I work on. There are Symfony Flex and Symfony Thanks, which are the two plugins that are always available on any project I have. And I'll tell you why later, just a little bit later. So this is starting as the regular project creation. So what this does is that it first looks for all the existing packages that are registered on packages.org. And in fact, this one is just a map of other JSONs because the list of all packages of all packages.org is too big to fit in one file. So this file contains the list of all the other provider files. You know, as you can see, there is one per year, and at some point it's split even per month. So there is this one, the first part of this year, second part, and so on. So this contains the list of all the packages that are available on packages.org. And when we create project Symfony/skeleton, one of these JSON file contains the Symfony skeleton description and where the code is and so on. So that's the first step Composer almost always does, synchronizing with the source database. Then it found the skeleton. So it found it in one of these JSONs. It downloads it. Where's the downloading? There. So it downloads the full description of the skeleton JSON file. So this is a file that contains all the versions that exist or existed for the Symfony skeleton package. So as you can see, we have version 3.3.x, but we also have 3.4. Okay, there are some tags at some moment. Okay, now we have all tags. And each sub part is just the Composer JSON file of that version. So that's what a provider JSON file is. So as you can see, we have many tags, but the file is not that big, and so on. So I'm not going to see all versions. As you can see, it's pretty long. And this exists for every single package you're going to need. So now we have the description, we have the Composer JSON files of the skeleton, so we know how to install it. Let's go. So what the Composer does is then downloading the code and running Composer install. So running Composer install downloads the dependencies. So this is provided by Symfony Flex, this output. And then we install everything. So every single package. So we have unzip because this is a zip source, and so on. Who knows how Symfony Flex work? Who ever heard about Symfony Flex? Okay, who knows how it works? Yeah, a little bit. So I'm going to, so yeah. So another best practice is let's talk a bit about Symfony Flex. So Symfony Flex is a Composer plugin you should use now. And a Composer plugin is something that hooks into the Composer life cycle. So Composer provides the hooks, and you can run code from a plugin before resolving the dependencies, after dependency resolution, before installing package number 1, after installing package number 1, before running command Composer update, after the command, and so on. So there are many, many hooks in Composer, and when you write a plugin, you can hook into these events. And Symfony Flex is one of, is one plugin, and it hooks into many places into Composer. And what it does many things. So one thing we see from this output is this. So maybe you don't have this exact same output. I'm not talking about these lines, which are the debugging lines. Let me just create the project again. Without the fancy output. Okay, done. But there is no output of the, okay, let me talk about this one. So this one is Composer, is Symfony Flex. And Symfony Flex downloads all the zip packages in parallel. So this is a new feature. To have that working, you need Composer 1.7. And you need also, or it's better if you have the curl, the CURL, PHP extension. So if you have both, then you'll be able to download your packages in parallel. So this is much faster than without. So the recommendation is just to have a setup that is able to run curl, Composer 1.7, and use Flex. When using Symfony Flex as a global package, you will benefit from Flex and from parallel downloads on every single project you're working on, even if it's not a Symfony project. So you can do that. So the command to do that is, and if you want, you can do it now, Composer global requires Symfony up. So I've already done that. What this does is that it installs Symfony Flex as a global dependency, and then Flex will just monitor and hook into every single Composer update or Composer install you're going to do in any project, and it will download all dependencies in parallel. And the benefit is huge. It makes it much faster to download dependencies. Yeah.
So about the projects that don't use Flex, it will just keep modifying the project and just install dependencies, and that's it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So if you have a project that don't have Flex, it will just download the things in parallel. There is another step, another thing it does. Let me, where is it? Okay. Let me show you. Or get back to this. Okay, so then it unzips everything. There, let me show you. Okay, so now this is the second run, so there is nothing else to download because everything is local already. So that's why there is no downloading or prefetching some packages. Okay, this is just normal. This is populating the vendor directory. Then we have these. Let's forget about that. Okay. Recipes. Okay, so this is the second part of Symfony Flex. What Symfony Flex does is that it adds default configuration to your project. So a default configuration is a set of files, and they will be downloaded from a global repository. We're going to see it just now. And so Flex will download configuration from this global repository, which is on GitHub, and put it into your Symfony application. That's why when I go into my folder, or just tree maybe, let's see tree config. As you can see, we created a project and the skeleton was empty. It contained just one Composer.json file, and actually just after it has more files than just one. And the reason is that Flex, so this Composer plugin, detected that we installed, let's say, the console, and because we installed the console, then Flex said, okay, I know how to create a default configuration for the Symfony console package. And I know it from the recipe repository. And so I can create more files locally to enable this package and make it just work. That's why we have this, let's say, bin console file, okay? So we have a file there, which is bin console, which is just the script to run the console. And it works, and we just installed Symfony console, and now we have bin console working. So, Symfony recipes. This is a repository where you can submit pull requests. There is another repository, which is recipes contrib. So actually there are two repositories, and you can contribute pull requests to these repositories. And contributing a pull request means providing default configuration for any package, any PHP package. Okay? So there are two repositories. One is the recipes, Symfony recipes repository, which holds official recipes for packages that the Symfony Core Team labels are as official packages. And then there are contrib, recipes contrib, and this is a repository which has configuration for, or default configuration for many packages. And these are provided by the community. So maybe the package there, at least there is no quality guarantee of anything on these packages, but someone took some time to create, let's say, a default configuration for Contentful Bundle version 3, and so on. So let me take an official recipe. I'm going back to recipes, and I'm going into the Symfony console recipe, just to do the link with the, okay. So in this repository, so as you can see, the layout is very easy. It's just name of the package, so Symfony/console/ minimum version where the configuration should apply to. And when, this means when installing Symfony console 3.3 or more, then copy, or then do this. Do this is what is written in this manifest JSON file. And this file just describes that when we install Symfony console, we should copy the bin folder in this repository to the bin folder in the project directory. There is a variable because we can configure where we put binaries, but basically we just copy bin to bin because bin, this is the default name, and so now we can go to the bin folder and it contains the console script. So, and this is exactly the file I've run before, which is bin console, this one. So this is the source code. It is locally the same as the one in the recipes folder. Is it clear for everyone? Did everyone get what this means? So, recap. We did Composer install Symfony console. Symfony Flex, the plugin, figured out that we have some configuration file in the recipes repository, the one that is on GitHub. It read the manifest JSON file there, and he said, okay, in this JSON file, there's something telling me that I should copy the bin console script to the local project. Here it is. Okay? And that's why we have this bin console. And there are, of course, more recipes for more things we just installed. So if you look at here, Symfony Flex installed configuration for Symfony Flex itself. It created the .env.dis file, so there is a file there that has this name. Then we also installed Symfony Framework Bundle, which comes with some configuration, and the configuration is this one. So from the recipes folder, we created the framework YAML, config files, the services.yaml, the index.php, the git ignore in the controller subfolder, just to create an empty folder, the kernel, and same for console, so we just saw this one. And we also have routing. So for routing, we created 3 routing files for dev, for default things, and your own routes to configure how routes will be loaded. That's why we have all these files again in the console and source folder. So if I do tree source, I have controller, I have the kernel, and if I do tree config, I have all the files we just saw. This one is managed by Flex. And then the manifest JSON files contains also something which is some text. We can just display text after installing Symfony Console, or after installing the framework bundle, we display this, which is some static text that is in the manifest JSON file, and it just tells you some hints for the next steps. Okay? Is everything clear at this step? Is there anyone that has some question? Does anyone have a question? Obvious? Yeah? Okay, so I'm going to do what's there. So let's read that. The first and most important thing is this. You will see it always, it will be printed at every run of Flex. When Flex creates some new files in your project, it will display this. Some files may have been created or updated. Please review, edit, and commit them. These files are yours. So this is very important. Everything that has been created in the config and source folder, these are your responsibility, and you can patch them, and you will need to patch them at some moment. So when some automated process creates a code, sometimes people are afraid of modifying the files because, oh, it created this for me, and maybe I should not touch them because maybe I'm going to lose some useful information there because I don't have the knowledge to understand what it means and so on. So at some point, all the generated files, you should own them and you should understand them. So commit them, remove them. They contain best practice because the default are usually the best default we can think of. And maybe they don't fit your needs, so just do that. So let me do it. So change to the project directory. Done. Create your code repository with a git init command. So this is a folder. It has no control version yet. So of course, use Git. That's the best practice. I don't need to spend much time on it. We used to create an empty Git repository in previous version of Flex and the default configuration. We removed it because it creates some issues for some, it's not the best default. So now we say, create an empty repository. So now it's done. I created a Git repository. So now I can do Git status and see that there are some files that are not tracked yet by Git. So these are just the files that were created for us. Not every single file is listed there. And the reason is that we have Flex created for us. There is one recipe telling create this git ignore file, and here are the files that should be ignored. So, for example, the Symfony framework bundle tells us in the default configuration to not commit the .env file, to not commit the public bundles directory. the var directory and the vendor directory. That's obvious. At least for the vendor directory, of course, you should never commit to vendor. So this is nice because all we have to do is to git add the current folder. So now we are ready to commit every new files that Flex created for us. So I'm going to commit them, and let's start. Okay, so I created the repository. You can do that. You should do that also now.
I would like to ask something. Just if you would go back to the part where it says review edits your configuration.
Okay, so there are no updates when Flex needs to create a file and the file already exists. It just keeps it. Yes, so that's a good question. Actually, let's say, so we have these files, and let's take this one. I'm just opening it. So these files, we're going to review these. So these are the default set of configuration parameters for that we have there. Because it's possible that we change in the official recipe folder, we change the default configuration. You will not get the update by default. So if we have a typo, and let's say we forgot this and we commit this, or in the past if we had done this mistake, you will not get the fix automatically. Because Flex cannot know how much you change and why you change the configuration. So that's why, I mean, you own these files. At some point, you own them, so every single thing you do there is yours. When you commit them, you adopt them, so now it's yours. So Flex cannot change that without breaking your configuration, so it won't do that.
But you said above that some files may have been created or updated.
Yes, yes.
If it says it may have been updated,
Yes, that's true. And
they may have changed something.
yes. So about Flex, there are 6 or 7, I don't remember exactly, way it can alter and change the configuration of your application. So one way is creating new files. That's what we just used, okay? So creating new files has this rule that when the file already exists, it will not be updated because we cannot make the change without being sure that it won't break anything. So, side note on this topic, if I want to, if I want to know if, let's say, this file has been updated, there's a way to do it, which is to remove the file and to ask Flex to just apply the recipes again. So, if we remove the file, we can run Flex, and Flex will say, oh, this file is not there. It has not been created, so I can create it now. And then, since you have Git, you can review the difference yourself and say, oh, I'm going to cherry pick this one is good. This one is my change, I want to keep it. And then you do the work. That's part of your work as a developer to understand what the difference means, and then to adopt the changes yourself. So that's the way to kind of update to the latest default configuration. Remove your configuration, ask Flex to create it again, and use Git to wonder about the changes. Okay? So that's one thing Flex does. Another thing is, I just already opened the file, but what Flex does is that it can add new things to the .gitignore file. So adding means updating. So in this case, this is one of the files that can be updated by Flex. And when Flex updates this, it creates those special comments, which are just like special tags that Flex knows about. And this means everything in between has been created by the framework bundle recipe. So this file can be updated, so there can be more. And the benefit of using these is that if you remove framework bundle, which you cannot really do in Flex because this is a minimum, but for other packages, we'll use more later. And these are the tags that Flex will use to remove just the small parts added for framework bundle when uninstalling framework bundle. So if I do composer remove framework bundle, it will just empty what's inside these tags. If I remove that, I can't do that, then Flex will never remove these lines anymore because it doesn't know that this is the part that has been created by framework bundle. So if you want to disable this feature of Flex, which is being able to remove entries from this file, just don't commit these. And if I commit this, Flex will not look at these again. Okay? If my English is not clear, just ask me to say it again in another way. I'll try to do my best. So adding files, updating the gitignore file. Another one is updating the .env.dis file. So .env.dis file contains environment variables and default values for environment variables that are used by your application. So same convention, we use comments, Flex uses comments to detect which environment variables it can remove when removing a package. And then we define some variables that you need to run the application. So the first one is the Symfony environment. So you know there is, by default, there are 3 environments. One is the dev environment, this one, which is the environment we run by default when we're working on the project. Another one is the prod environment. So the prod environment runs with many things disabled so that it runs at full speeds and with caching enabled and so on. So it's, you know about that already, I suppose. And then there is the test environment, which is used and which is using configuration for testing your application and when you run PHP unit. App secret, this one is used sometimes in Symfony, inside Symfony, when we need some unique string that nobody can guess to create, unique tokens and so on. So it's generated automatically so you have a different token on your machine. We also have default environment variables which are commented. These are needed if you have some reverse proxy in front of your Symfony application and you need to trust the headers so that your application can know what's the host visible from the outside, which will be different from the host as seen by PHP. Because when there's a proxy, PHP behind, of course, let's say the client IP is different than the official from the external is different than the one that is seen from the PHP process. When there's a reverse proxy, the PHP process sees the IP of the reverse proxy. So when we need to forward the IP from the outside to the Symfony application, we need to trust the reverse proxy as something which is a reliable source for forwarding information. Otherwise, we would be at risk and some evil people could, break your application or hack it at least. So this comes also by default, but it's not enabled because you know if you need to enable it. So that's another one. Another is the bundle file. So when I did this tree, or just, yes, let's say tree source, tree config, sorry. So we have config, yes, it's VI, config bundles. So this is a file, and this file is updated when you install a bundle. So when you install a bundle, Flex supposes that you're going to enable the bundle. So we install the framework bundle, so we list the bundle as something that should be enabled in the Symfony application. So this tells enable the bundle for all environments. We're going to install more bundles later, and we can do these kind of things. This one tells, okay, enable the bundle, but only in the dev environment. So we can select which bundles run for each environment and have a different setup for the dev environment that, let's say, has the web profiler toolbar and the prod doesn't have it because of this kind of configuration. So that's why there are some files that are updated. That's your question. Any more question? Is it okay? So, I'm just, what's the port that was recommended? Okay, I'm just running this one. Okay. So, PHP-big S is a feature of the PHP binary, which runs a local web server that listens on this IP and port and uses the public folder as the document root. So when we are going to, when we open this URL, so we just open this URL, then we have the Symfony application and the index.php file that is just run, and that tells us that it works, basically. We have an empty application, and that it tells us that we installed a Symfony 4.1.4 application. Okay, so, okay, let's continue with that. Okay, we can keep it, or I'm just closing it, so now it doesn't answer anymore, just to continue telling about this. Do you have any question at this stage? More question? Let me go back to the, so closing this one, and this one. Let's go back to this. So we just did that, and we opened that. So who has not this screen on his screen or her screen? Is everyone at this stage? Yes? So we already did that. We just did that. Yeah, so next step. Let's just do this one. So I'm copy pasting. Composer requires server -- dev. So let's say just before. I'm just here clean. So Composer is going again to download the provide or JSON file to packages.org. That's why we're waiting now. Okay. I don't have the Wi-Fi. Okay, maybe the Wi-Fi is down. Do you have Wi-Fi or work for you? Maybe I can use. Okay. So while it's installing, there is a feature of Flex which is hinted by this command. So this command tells us restricting packages listed in Symfony to 4.1.star. So this is something new. We just enabled this feature a few weeks ago. So maybe 2 weeks ago, maybe 10, maybe 1 week. I don't remember exactly. When you manage this version of Symfony packages, there is something to care about. Let me open this one. So now we have Symfony console, framework bundle, and YAML. And as you can see, I didn't mention and comment about that. There is a star. It means any version. Okay? Which is not really good if you stop at this step. It means just install Symfony Console in any version. I don't care for the version. It means Symfony 4 or 3 or 2 is possible. This is not actually what we want. What we want is to be able to install 4.1. So 4.1 would mean, let's say this one. This one is better. This one tells us I want any version 4 starting from 4.1. Okay? So by doing this, we gain more control. And so we gain more control, that's nice. We can also restrict and say, okay, I want 4.1, but I don't want any 4.2. If I write it this way, that's the difference between the caret and the tilde. So this tilde tells us 4.1 star. It's exactly the same as 4.1 star. Now, if I do with the caret, it means actually this and lower than 5. So these two are equivalent with an O here. So what we do, okay, let's do it this way. So this is about managing your dependencies. When you create a Symfony application, I'm pretty sure you want to control the version that is used for the Symfony packages. You don't want, when we release Symfony 4.2, maybe you'll prefer to not update to Symfony 4.2 right now. It's not because we released the tag that you are ready to move yourself. Maybe you want to wait until 4.2.3 is released because maybe you think that there are some bugs that would be part of 4.2.0. That's possible. So as part of your process, you'll want more control. That's why using this kind of dependency, let's say this one, is better. But if we just stop at this step, there is an issue. Which one? Can someone tell me? Let's say I'm doing this. So now it looks like I'm clear because I fixed the Symfony console version and I fixed this one also at 4.1 star. Am I ready or is there an issue? There is one. Which one? Can someone tell me? So the job description is controlling the version of your Symfony packages and having only 4.1 version of any Symfony components that you install, so that you know you're safe, these are tested, they work well with your application, fine. So that's your job description. How do you do that? Is it done now, or are there remaining things to fix? Yeah? Yes, you're right. So I can also do that. Anything else? So now you're going to your CTO and saying, okay, I'm done. Yeah? No? You have to run composer update, and what will happen? It will resolve the dependencies. And when resolving the dependencies, it will figure out that the framework bundle needs the Symfony routing component, because it does, actually. So in the composer JSON file of framework bundle, there is a line which tells, and that's not inside our project, that's a transitive dependency, it tells to use, let's say, this one. What does it mean? It means that framework bundle is fine with running with Symfony routing 4.2. Yeah? So since composer updates to the latest stable version of your dependencies, it means that it will install 4.2. Yep? So we just control, by having this, we just control the version of these dependencies, the one that are explicitly listed in our list, but we just forget and allowed any version of the of these of the transitive dependencies. Is that clear? Yeah, you agree? You see the issue? Yeah. Okay. Great. So that's the issue we have to fix, and that's a new issue. It didn't exist before when we were running with Symfony. When we do that, it means we download one package, it contains all components in the same exact version, so done. It means we have all components in the same exact version. It's not possible in any other way. But now, Composer will just resolve dependencies and figure out the best one, and the best one for routing is maybe 4.2 when it will be released. So, there is a feature, and I'm going back at the beginning. We do not control the version of the Symfony dependencies, of the Symfony components, through the require section. There is something new, which is in the extra part of the JSON file. So I'm going down, and I'm going here. And this is this line. So this line is managed by Flex. So Symfony Flex will look, so the plugin, so Symfony Flex will look at extra.symfony.require, and it will use the constraint you put there to force this rule on every Symfony/something package. Okay? So that's the new way, and don't forget about it. That's the new way to control the version of the Symfony package dependencies, and it's done by Flex. Okay, so the rule is a bit more complex. So the rule applies only to packages that are listed in Symfony/Symfony. So monologue bundle is not listed in Symfony/Symfony. So it's not concerned by this rule. And the same question also exists for old, not maintained anymore components. So let's say Symfony class loader. So the Symfony class loader component has been deprecated, and there is no version 4 of this component. It means it will not be restricted by this anymore. So if there is a component, a dependency that needs the class loader component, it will be installed in that version 3 because there's no other way to fix it. That's the case. It was a bug at the beginning when we released the feature, and I think Behat, maybe, Behat 3 has a dependency on the class loader version 3. And so people could not use Behat anymore because of this. And so now the fix is merged, so it works, basically. So yes, this means for any version 4.1 of Symfony/Symfony, look at everything that is listed there and do the intersection of the version of what happens, of what exists there. There is, just so that you know, I don't know if you followed, or if you already saw that, but there is a bonus to doing this. The way it works, the way this rule works, is that it removes the tags from the provider JSON files before Composer before the dependency resolver of Composer runs. So the process is that we take this file. So you remember this file is, well, it should be in JSON, but it's not. So this file is the big, no, okay, it's not this one. Let me just go back to, this JSON file. Do you remember it? So this is the file. This is for the skeleton, but there are similar files for, let's say, routing. So this is part of the packages.org API. So now we have this JSON, and the JSON tells us that the Symfony routing component has these many. So the list of tags for the routing component is huge. So the way it works, the way Flex works, is that just before Composer opens these files, it just removes the legacy tags from the list, which means Composer will not know that these tags exist. That's Flex doing that just before the dependency resolver run. And it has a huge benefit in terms of number of tags to consider when resolving the dependencies. So in order to resolve the dependencies, Composer has to wonder about every single tag and to combine it with every single tags of any other packages you're going to use and to see if it's the right combination. And all the old tags, they just pollute the dependency resolution algorithm because Composer always wonders about them. And by removing them, we free memory and CPU because Composer will not check them at all. Okay? So now if you do Composer update with this feature, it will run in 3 seconds. And if you do Composer update without this feature, it will take much more. 30 seconds, 5 minutes, it all depends on the number of the complexity of your graph. But the complexity will be much reduced. That's why with Symfony Flex, you can run Composer update much faster than without Symfony Flex. And that's the second reason why installing Symfony Flex as a global dependency, Composer requires global Symfony Flex, is just a lifetime saver because there are 2 benefits. One is downloading zip files in parallel. And the second one is removing all the legacy tags that are not needed anymore, so we can just blacklist them and say, no need to consider them at all. So that's also something Flex does for you, even global. So don't forget about it. That's the new way to configure the version of your Symfony / anything packages. Okay, so Composer requires server --dev. There is no package that is called server, so this is resolved again. That's another small feature, but useful of Flex. So Flex has a list of aliases, which are listed in the recipes repository. And so there is an alias which tells when server is used as a package name, then just install the web server bundle. That's what, there's an alias from server to web server bundle. And then process is a dependency of the web server bundle, so process has been installed. And so now we applied and we created we applied one recipe for web server bundle, which is again in the recipe repository. And it means we have this web server bundle ready to run. So I'm going git status. What is this? No?
The voice is coming back after some seconds.
Okay, that's strange. Yeah? Okay. So let's ignore that. Or trying to ignore it. So now Flex did some modification. It just modified this one. So it modified the JSON file that's Composer doing that. It changed the composer.log file, not a surprise. It modified the bundles file, the one that lists all the bundles that are enabled. And it modified actually the symfony.log file. I did not talk about it. Let's do it. So git diff. You can do that also so that you can just have the diff locally so you can wonder about it and scroll differently than me. So git ignore has a new file listed as something which should not be committed. It's again in the same kind of tags. Okay. And okay, so we have the web server PID. Nice. So this is a file that is created automatically by the web profiler bundle, or web server bundle, actually. We added this in the composer.json file, not a problem. The only difference is the comma here, if you're wondering why .env is in red. then we have the composer.log, so I'm going to skip it because it's not that useful. So we have the bundles.php file, and the bundles.php file has a new bundle listed there, which is the web server bundle, and which is actually enabled only in the dev environment. So that's why the bundle is going to be enabled and only in dev. And now I also have the symfony.log file. So let's talk a bit about the symfony.log file. When Flex applies a recipe to your project, if you install the project twice, then Flex needs to know that there is no need to apply the recipe a second time. That's why it needs to create this log file, and this log file lists all the recipes that have been already run on the local project. And it will not run them anymore if they are listed in the symfony.log file. This means, so this is a file you need to commit, so it should be part of your Git history. When you install new packages, Flex will do that for you. So as we can see, it creates an entry for Symfony process, which has been installed at this version. And it also installed or lists that we installed web server bundle at version 3.3 of the recipe, not of the component. And the recipe that has been applied is this one. So this describes the recipe that we run at that time. So maybe the recipe hash will change. If we change the recipe of the web server bundle, the hash will change. That's a way to know if you are up to date or not when updating Flex. So what you can do if you want to ignore that, you can. So yeah, sorry. Before you asked me how I can apply new the updated recipes to an existing setup. There are two things you can do: remove the config directory if you want, and remove the symfony.log file. Because if you don't remove the symfony.log file, Flex will say, okay, there is no framework YAML file, but the framework bundle recipe has already been applied. So if the file is not there, that's because the developer decided to remove it. I'm not going to overdo this. But if you want Flex to not know that the recipe has already been applied, which means if you want Flex to apply the recipe, you need to just remove the composer.log file, and then Flex will recreate and reapply the recipes. Yes, symfony.log. Yeah, I mean this one. So you may need to deal with it. Okay, let's commit. So the server feature gave us the server run command and a few other. So git help server, does that work? Okay. So now we have server run, server start, server status, server stop. I'm going to use, let's say, server start. Okay, so server start runs a web server in the background. So now I can open the browser again and get the same page as I already had before, except that now it's running in the background, so I can still use the console. And there are a few more features. It's more, yes, the integration is better. So we saw that. We changed the git ignore, the bundles, the log file. That's done. We just run that. So this is using server run. You can server stop. Now it's stopped. And if I do server run, it's live in the browser. So now we have a blocking. With the console is blocked. And this can be nice because if you update, so I'm updating, then you have lines there listing which requests happened. which is nice when you need that. So what I do personally is that I open a console with this, so I can list that and see that things happen. Sometimes there are some errors also in this output, so it can be useful to look at it. And I just create a new console and use it. Okay, let's say bin console to do the development. Okay, back to this. Okay, let's do a break. So, any question about this first hour? Something which was not clear and you figure out during the break?
Yeah, perhaps I would like to understand how Symfony Flex is hooked with Composer. So does it hook into the Composer life cycle, or does it have its own life cycle, or both, or is it?
So what is the, I'm going to repeat question so that it can be recorded. Okay. So your question is how is Composer, is Symfony Flex hooked into Composer basically?
Yeah, it does at all.
Yes, so yes, it does hook in Composer and it does not provide any hook on its own. So Symfony Flex is not extendable. You cannot extend the feature set of Flex except by doing pull request on Flex, of course. And I'm not sure. Let's try opening the code. I think I've it. Symfony Flex should be here. So it's starting to have a few files. So this is the source code of Flex. And okay, let me just show you one thing. So this file is the entry point, which is the first file that Composer loads to enable the plugin. And this is described actually, just to, when you create a Composer plugin, so it's a package, but it has a special type, which is Composer plugin. And then there is extra.class, which gives the class to bootstrap the plugin. So this tells to Composer, just create or just use this class as the entry point to enable the plugin. So I'm just going to open it and go at the end. That's one part of hooking into Composer, into Composer. So this is exactly the same as event subscribing into Symfony. It's almost the same. You just give an event name and then a callback and maybe a priority. So this is how Flex hooks into Composer. So let's say it hooks into pre-package install event, and then it calls populate files cache dir, which is a method on the class. And that's basically it. There are a few other things, but basically that's it. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So that it means that if each time I actually require Symfony Flex, then it is able to hook into all these events.
Yes.
Yeah, and then each time I run Composer install, then those events are then triggered.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's how it works. That's Composer. And then there are many other things into the code, but we don't care anymore much. Okay. Where is that? Okay, that's internal notes. Let's go back to this. So let's create a small controller. There are many steps here, so okay. So we're going to create a small controller by hand. Okay? So can you do that, or let me open it. Open directory. Who is not using PHP Storm? So everyone is using PHP Storm. What was the name? It was W something. So I'm going to create a controller, new file. You can do that also. So namespace app, and now I'm going to create this class, hello controller. Let's do some action. Maybe this one. So I just created a JSON response, okay? Let's route it. Let's create the routing file for it. So let's put it on the hello, and I'm going to use this hello controller. What did I forget? Yes. It's not the right namespace there. Okay. So we created the response. I'm waiting. If you want to do the same, do it. So there used to be a convention, several notes about that. This line could also be written this way, okay? You know the difference, or what the difference used to mean? Does anyone know? Someone would like to give it a try? Okay, so you might see in existing application this way with a single colon. This means on this path, call this controller, and when there is a single colon, the first part is meant to be a service identifier. So you could say my hello controller, and by creating a service with the name my hello controller, this would just call the index method on this service. Okay? This is deprecated, so now it works the same with double colon, and the first part is still meant to be a service. So now we don't care service or not, class or not. We just look if there is a service with that name, what is before the colon, and if there is one, we use it as a controller as a service, and if not, and if it's a class name, then we create an instance of this class, which doesn't need to be a service anymore, and we just call the index action on it. There also used to be a convention to have the action suffix. You don't need it actually, so if you want to remove this repetition from your controllers, I think we are promoting it now because it's just noise. So you can remove or keep, it's just up to you, the action suffix on your action. You don't need it. That's the important thing. So now I'm returning this one.
Yes, just one more question. So now it's best practice to use double colon or one colon?
Double colon.
Double colon.
Always you use double colon. And it is actually deprecated to use one colon. So use that. Let me go back to my notes to be sure I'm going. So we just did that. We created the configuration to load the file. Okay, so this is about different name and action. But anyway, it's the same. So this, yes, if you want it, there is another way to have the controller. This one is a bit bigger controller. So I'm going to make it, to evolve the controller to make it bigger to use more features. And one thing we can do is extend the abstract controller. And so now I can replace this by JSON, which means exactly the same, except that now we have a helper. And we don't need JSON response anymore. You can do that also while I'm typing, if you can. Tell me if I'm going too fast or too slow. I would like everyone to be able to run this. So I'm still having the same response because this is exactly what it means. Any comment on that? Is that what you're doing when you're doing controllers in Symfony or not? Yes? And do you know, are you really extending controller or abstract controller? Do you know what the difference is? So I can also do that. Let me keep it. That's the same. Do you know the difference between controller and abstract controller? Who knows the difference between them? Hmm? Okay, so the difference, so the best practice now is to use abstract controller. And abstract controller has the exact same helpers as controller. Controller exists since more time than abstract controller. Abstract controller is something new since Symfony 3.4. It was not recommended at that time. It is not recommended in 3.4 because it misses some features versus controller. The most important one is accessing parameters. It's more difficult to access parameters with abstract controllers version 3.4 and 4.0, but we fixed that in 4.1. So we have all these methods that are available, which make it nice to access parameters, access the user, check security with is granted, to do redirection, render some tweak view, etc., etc. So the difference between controller and abstract controller should, no, I don't have this. Or do I have? No, I don't. Yes. So the difference is that controller accesses services through the main dependency injection container. Okay? So we're going slowly, not slowly, let's jump into dependency injection. We're going to spend some time on it. So, when I do this, I want the router. How does that work? It works by accessing an object. Actually, it's the same as doing this. Maybe it's more explicit this way. So when I do this container get router, I access the container property. What is the container property? It's something that contains the main dependency injection container when extending controller. And it means that we can access any public service that is available in the main container. So the router is one of the public services that is available in the main container. And this is not a good practice. Can someone tell me why? Sorry? Yeah, yes, it depends on the container. So it means that here we have an implicit thing, which is that there is a router, something called a router, and that the result of this the return value of this method is something that implements some interface, of course, but nothing actually in the code tells us what is expected as a return type. So we don't know how to use that. Of course, there is documentation, and there is something somewhere that tells, oh, the router is something that implements a router interface, and the router interface has some method you can use in it. But from the code point of view, it's just implicit. It's written somewhere else. So this code is broken in this regard. It's not self-consistent. It's not self-describing. It hides the dependencies of this. So using the main dependency injection, main container is a bad practice because of this. So instead, we extend the abstract controller, and the abstract controller has a property and a feature which is provided by the base class, which is that it implements this method. So this just makes the method obvious. It already exists on the parent, and getSubscribedServices is a static method, and the return value of this method is something that describes what we need inside the action of our controller. So the return value, I need something more to be able to show you. Oh, maybe I can just var dump. Let's try this. It's going to break the output, but okay, nice. So this is var dump. So it's pretty basic debugging. So now we call this method, and this method has some nice information in it. And one is that this tells Symfony, and this tells everyone really, it's not only Symfony. This tells the reader that this class is going to need a container, and from the container it's going to use only these services and none others. One named router, and the value bound to this router key is of type router interface. So now this makes it explicit that router is a router interface instance. And now we just made our dependencies explicit. Is it okay for everyone? Do you understand the difference? Yeah? So we made that explicit, and we cannot access any other key from what is described here. So in the main Symfony container, there are more services that are public. But if you try to access them from the abstract controller, you will not get them. You will get an exception instead. It means it forces you to follow the best practice of making your dependencies explicit. This is a really important one. Maybe I'm sure you have code already written that extends controller. You need to make it extends abstract controller. This is deprecated actually, since it will be deprecated controller in 4.2. So in a few months we'll deprecate that, so that you'll be encouraged to move to abstract controller. And it means also that if you want, so put that in your mind or on your notes, but if tomorrow or if one day you need more services than the ones listed there, you can do that, but you need to make them explicit. So here I can say I want something, let me change to, how can I do that? To 4 spaces. Okay, anyway. If I want something which is my service of my interface, which doesn't exist, but We'll create one later. This makes it explicit that you are creating a new my service key, and the return value there will implement, or should implement, or must implement actually, this my interface thing. Okay? So if you need more services in your container, in your controllers, you can do that. Do it this way. Yep. So that's the difference, and that's why we created abstract controller, to make your dependencies explicit. I'm just removing that for now. We're going to maybe use it later. Let's do a service for now. Maybe we should add more dependencies to our stack. So let me go back there. Yes, so we created that. Tac, tac, tac. Let me just remember. I don't know if this one is somewhere. I would like to have this. Okay. So let me just, I'm just trying to, so I'm going back to this. So I'm going to require, let's start, okay, let's say Symfony Composer required debug. I'm going this because, and I can also do it this way. So this will install the web profiler bundle. This will install var-dumper. And this is nice because it will provide us with this toolbar, not on the JSON output, but, and it will also provide us with the dump function, which is better than var-dump. So now we just install var-dumper. We have Twig ready. The reason is that the toolbar is generated with Twig. So we have the profiler bundle, which is what we need. Monologue also. So many things come here. Okay, so Flex created files for us, configuration files. I'm going to add this ID to my files. That's something that is not in the recipe, so it's mine to ignore. Okay, so I can just add that. Commit. Okay, I'm committing the hello controller also, but that's okay. So now I can go back there. There is there. Let's use dump. Just refreshing. And yeah, okay. The reason, okay, I'm switching quickly, but it's not there. It would be better to have some HTML output, isn't it? Okay, I'm going to switch to an HTML output. It will be better, okay? Something, we're going to use the maker bundle right now. Is going to make it easier for us to create files, okay? So I installed debug. Now let's require the maker bundle. So the maker bundle is a package, a bundle that has, that is a code generator. I don't know if you've tried it already, but we add more and more comments to it to make it easier for you to create controllers, to create entities, to create different kind of objects. So now I can, bin console maker, or make actually. And so now the current version of the maker bundle provides command to make some authentication, to make a command, to make a controller, to make some basic CRUD system, to make entities, to create fixture files, to help creating functional tests, forms, and so on. A twig extension, a subscriber, these are things that you might need to do at some point, and the boilerplate is just boring, so let's do a controller again. By making that, I'm going to recreate the controller, so I'm going to remove the hello controller. I don't like it. Okay, this way, and now bin console make controller hello controller. So that's a nice feature, and that's something we try to improve and to make as good as possible. When there is an error, we try to give you the best possible explanation for the error. So composer require annotations. This is needed for controllers. The reason is that there is a best practice for routing, and the best practice is using annotations on your routes instead of doing it in YAML. Okay? So we recommend to use just annotations. So now I created the hello controller. It means I can remove my special thing here. So I'm going to disable this because I don't need it anymore. And instead, I should have something which is ready for me already, which is this one. So that's a file that has been created when I installed the annotation packages. And this one tells the routing system to load everything that is, to look at every classes in the source controller folder and to wonder about annotations there. So thanks to this file, I'm already set up to use the controller, hello controller file. And this is the one that has been generated by the make controller command. So as you can see, it's just the same as before. It has a few differences. One is that there is this annotation. So we moved this from the YAML to the annotation. And we are not using, or we're not generating JSON anymore. We're just generating HTML from a twig file that has been created also as part of the command. Okay? So let me refresh that. Go to hello. And now this is the new output you should have. So, I'm going with git status. Let's add everything. So these are the files that have been modified. This is the change we have on the controller. This is just obvious. I'm going to commit it, just because we commit at every important step. So add maker plus yeah. Okay. Back to this, updated. Now I can use dump. It's going to be better. I would just want to show you this. So we can dump, and when we dump this, which is the container, we can see that it has a property, which is the protected property, and this one contains a service locator. So this is a special object that is injected into the object, into the controller, that gets the subset of services we ask for. So it has factories for the service that exists, so the router and a few others that make it possible to use the helpers that are provided by the abstract controller. And if you create this get subscribed services method we just created before, you will see more things in this list with your own services listed if you declare them. Okay? And let's do just one change, just to make it, just to be sure I'm not telling lies, but let me extend controller for a minute, refresh, it works the same, but if I look at the dump, here I have a new class, which is, we still have the container, but now the container tells me it's an instance of this is the main container. So this src dev debug project container is the generated name for the container. So now we have the global, the main container. We don't want that. So that's the main difference between that. Back to this. Back to this. Okay, let's do something useful. Let's create a class. I don't know if I have this highlight. I need to copy paste it from somewhere. Okay, let me borrow it from a code repository where I have everything. It's going to be easier this way. So I have a few steps there for us. We did that. Okay. So I'm adding this so that you can copy paste it. Okay. So this should be, so you can install it, and let me put in the name here. So this is the name. So let's create this file. Back to this. With an S or not? Not. Okay, so we're creating a service which is just generating or using some highlights, returning some highlights for a city. Okay, it's pretty basic service, just for the example. So this provides us get highlights, we give it a city, and done. So I'm going to need it and to use it there. So I have several ways to do that. We can just do it with the way. What is the issue? Yes. So let me do it this way. There are three ways actually to make it work. One is this one, since I already mentioned this, let's use it. So I'm going to use that. It was the highlight generator. Okay. So now, as you understood, we want to be able to use this method in this class, in the controller, so we can do something with it, maybe in the twig output. So now let's try accessing it. So this is one way. This way tells what I told before, which is making your dependencies explicit. You just declare it, and you can get that. the difference with what we did before is that this one uses no key. As you can see, I did not put any key in the array. And the reason is that by default, the name of the service is or the key of the service is its class name. So I can do that and get access to the service really easily. So if I do that, highlight generator, I can dump it just to figure out if it worked and what is behind, and then refresh. And I do have a highlight generator instance there. So it worked. And if we dump this, it means we are just showing you the factories, but we have it listed there. As you can see, there is a key which has the name of the class, and then a closure to get it. We can rename it. Okay, highlight. Okay, I'm not going to do it, but I think you get the point. If I put it here, I get it. This will work also. Okay, so if there is a best practice here, it's to free you from wondering about names for your services. Just use the name of the class to name your services. And this is what is done by default. So by default, we use that. And it's difficult enough to figure out a name for this one. So now we use it as the name. So let's say,
Just a small question. Does this get is not something that will work as well?
this get would work.
Yeah, but is it deprecated or not?
No, it's not. It works. You have you can do any. If I had a recommendation, it would be this to make it more explicit, because it makes it more explicit that there is a container there that has this get method. But it works exactly the same actually. And we did not deprecate get, so use it. Okay, let's talk a bit about that. Do you have any question at this stage? Is it obvious? Or do you have anything that is magic to you? What is magic? Okay, there are two other ways to get services into controllers. Which ones? Yes, this is a way to tell how to inject services, but from the code point of view, in this local class, I can inject the service, I can provide injection points in two other ways. One way is to declare the dependency in these get subscribe services, and there are other ways. One common way, which is not specific to controllers, is using a constructor, of course. So here we can also provide this highlight generator and just get it. So now we can use this and dump just that if we want. Okay. So if we do that, yes. This does almost the same. At least from our point of view, it does exactly the same right now. Yep.
You would use something like this if the controller is specifying only one route.
Yes.
If you have multiple routes you're putting in one controller, then I think this is not a good idea.
So, yes, you're right. You're right, and that's the topic. So the question and why. So the question is why should we use and when should we use one way or the other? And the answer you're providing is when you don't need this service in every single action, then adding it in the controller is maybe not lazy enough. Maybe you're creating the service, but you're not going to use it. So maybe it's just overhead to your request, and you'd better not do that and declare it with this one in this case. That's what you're saying, yeah? Yeah. So that's one valid reason to not use it in the controller. So there is a practice which is not especially a bad practice, which is not also especially a bad practice. It's neither best or it's just up to you. You'll find blog posts and people telling you that you can do one action per controller. It's a common practice in many projects. I have an opinion, but it's not the best practice or anything special. So you can do that, and if you do that, you don't have this problem anymore, because if you have one action per controller, it means you can use the constructor, and there is no laziness problem because you will use this action for this controller. So if you do one action per controller, there is no difference between constructor and get subscribed service at this moment. There is one actually. So you can do that. It's really nice. Maybe you prefer this way. Personally, I don't prefer it because I think it's too long to type, or at least to read. So there is the third way to inject a service, and this works only for controllers. So before showing you the third way, the constructor is something that works on any service, obviously. You're already used to it. The get subscribe services is also something that works on you can make work on every service. Every single service can have a special container created for it. There's a way to do that. It's already enabled for controllers, but you can use it on any service. Now, for controllers and only for controllers, there is a third way, which is to inject the service in the action. Do you have a question?
Yeah. About single action controllers. So what is Symfony's recommended way on using them? Using the invoke method or something else? Or the regular method?
So people do this. You can do this. So you say invoke. So now your controller is a callable, and then it will work as a single. Yeah, okay. I didn't do that. Let's remove this for a moment. It works the same way. Okay. So this is a good way to make it explicit that you're using single action controllers. You just create this invoke method. That's the name of making your controller invocable. And you're not going to create any more method on it. I think personally, it's asking for creating many classes. So sometimes maybe it's better to just group several actions in one single class instead of creating many files. So I think it's more maintainable. That's just my opinion. So I don't have any recommendation except that do the most simple thing first and make it more complex, which means one action per controller. I think it's more complex to manage because there are more files to open. The layout is
easier testing and I'd say easier maintenance because it's better integrated into PHP Storm via search or something.
Okay, maybe. Maybe. I'm not sure about testability because I think there is no difference for testability.
Depends on the dependencies.
Okay. Yeah, okay. There is something specific about controllers which at the design level and the solid principle level. A controller class is something that is pretty different from almost any other service class in an application, it's not specific to Symfony. Because a controller is just a callable bound to a root. So a controller doesn't have to follow a contract, except that being a callable that can be bound to the root. So you will never see a controller that extends some interface that tells you a controller must implement this and this and this interface. Let's say index action and edit action and so on. Because a controller is just, yes, a callable. So when you create a controller and you add many methods, one per action, maybe at the API level it doesn't mean anything. It's not a contract. Implementing these methods is not a contract. So at this moment we are breaking kind of object-oriented design because we hack a class into a collection of callables, which is basically what a controller with many actions is. So this is not theoretical object-oriented design. We don't care. We just need to bind routes to callables, and having a class as a collection of callables is not an issue when we only need one callable. Now, if we use this pattern, maybe at the design level we are closer to good object-oriented programming because we have a kind of contract. Every controller looks the same. It can be called the same way. That's not exactly true because we are going to have arguments to the method. So every invoke and every controller will have a different signature. So we are not in the contract world also. Just some look. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but yeah, just look on that. So I'm going back to use my index method. Okay. So the third way is to use a constructor argument, and this will work also. Okay? My advice in this case is being pragmatic. Do what makes you most productive in each situation. That's my advice. Yes, of course. We don't need it. Actually, we are not using it. Yeah. So we don't need that anymore. It's the same. It was not used actually, or it was, but we did not access the service. So now we have that. Okay? So this has the same property as before about laziness, which is that the controller is called every single time we access any action, which makes it maybe useless to create some services, or maybe it creates some useless services for one specific action. This one is more specific because the services are created only if we call index action, and if another action doesn't need that, fine, it will not be created because everything is lazy. Maybe it's not lazy enough, and that's the difference between that's one technical, there are other differences of course, but one technical difference is that if, let's say you do that, so let's say you want something to happen only when the admin is logged in. Maybe in this case we created the highlight generator for no reason, because it's behind an if, and we're creating it for every single user, but maybe it's a heavy dependency. So that's why using this one might be at the technical level and the choice to make when creating a service of this highlight generator type. Okay? So you'll have to mix that and to decide for yourself on each case. But you need to know, of course, that the three exist. And yeah, that's it. So let's be productive and type as less as possible for this example. Let's use it this way. So now we need a city for this one. Let's create a city parameter here. I don't remember the syntax. I'm not sure. This is new, so I don't know it. I created the pull request, but I don't remember it. Does it work? Will it work? Feels like so. Okay, I don't need the column because it's in the... Okay, so I'm sure you're already used to declaring your routes with parameters. There's something new in Symfony 4.1 in case you missed it, which is that you can declare your defaults and the requirements straight into the root. So this is the new part I'm talking about. So interrogation mark, and then you give the default, and you get the default. Yeah, so that's what I'm using here. So now I can just call our highlight generator and get highlight. This, I can also pass it to my twig, so we can display it, which would be here more. Okay, let's do that. So this is just, we can dump straight, dump returns the value that is provided, so I can both, okay, so now we have highlights with car, Thurman, and our last line is what the service contains with the city, Rovinj ice cream shop. Let's put an R here, so I'm going to remove the dump. Let's use it in the template. So this is a file that has been created for us by the make controller command. So I'm going to loop in twig. So it's for highlights. And 4. Okay, highlight. Okay. Any question? It's okay?
Based on the previous function we had called get substart services,
Yes.
where we injected a new service class.
Yes.
What if the service class has dependency, like say service class, it has a repository or entity, let's say.
Yes.
How can we inject that? Because you find that in conflict of service, you tell what dependency it needs.
Yes.
But here, if we do
Okay. So let me open. So the question is, how do we inject dependencies into, let's say, this class? So we do. So the first thing is to tell that you're going to need the dependency. So through the constructor, let's say, okay, let's say the router. I'm going to use the router, or maybe the logger. Let's say the logger. Okay, I'm going to need the logger. What I need to do right now, I'm just writing regular code. So let's up this logger. So let's say this is the feature we need. And we want to log what happened. Okay. So let's say this is the business we want to do with it. Okay? Done. It's done. When I go in the logs, generating highlights for Revenge. Okay? So it worked. So how does it work? Yes, the auto-wiring, yeah. So who doesn't know how it works? You can raise your hand. Everyone knows how it works? Yeah? Okay, great. So the way it works is that there is a system which is called auto-wiring, and auto-wiring will look for a service with the same name as the type hint. Okay? So in this case, the framework bundle has an alias for this service name. It's a service name. It's not a type hint conceptually. So there is a service name which has this name, and when it exists, and when there is no explicit configuration for a service, but the dependency is needed, then this is the one that is injected by default. So we can build 80% of our dependency injection configuration without any configuration, thanks to this mechanism. And that's what we did just now. And that's also how it works for this. This one did exactly the same. It looked for a service with the name, with a full name, so this one. And actually, there is a service with this name, which is declared because the class exists in the other file. Okay? So the best practice is to use auto-wiring. Has anyone some comment about that, or wondering? Is it obvious? Of course, we should do that, or not? Before we introduced auto-wiring, many people were not convinced that it was a good idea. I think now that we have a few months of experience with it, we know that it works really well, so just use auto-wiring and stop making configuration for the sake of it when it's just auto-wiring. Okay? So what's next? So this one is a more complex. So we have the logger. So I'm just looking at the code bank, figuring out the differences with what we did, but I think, so let's. So we have a name for the city. We have, I have a bug in the view. Refreshing because I lost the view. Maybe I'm not connected. I should be. Okay, let's wait. Yep, we can do that. Maybe I lost the possibility to type. Yes, great. So, okay, sorry, back to this. So we already almost did everything there. There is a repository. We're going to create a repository. Okay, so let's do a small repository. At what time should we stop? I don't know. We'll see later. Okay, so back. So yes, just to show you some. Yes, okay. Sorry, I'm just reminding things slowly. let me show you this. Bin console debug auto wiring. So you can type that if you want. So if you type that, you'll see a list, and this list provides you with all the fully qualified aliases that are available in the application. And it gives you everything you can type in for and get a service automatically. So the logger is in the list. Can you see it? There. So there is an alias for the logger, and for, in fact, this one, and this is an alias to the service that is internally named monologue.logger. So that's why we have something, because there is a service that is available and that we can use. So there are more services. So this is a service that's ours, but there are other services. So if you need any of them, just run the command. You can also, yes, give it, I think, is it case sensitive or not? Okay. So if you give it, say, I want something in the cache, okay, these are the interfaces that are in the cache. So this should become, just don't forget about the command. If you're wondering which services are available, just read that. All the services that have aliases should be services that are useful for you. There are much more services in Symfony. You can see them by typing debug container. And if you do that, the list is bigger, as you can see. But many services are needed just as dependencies of other services that, in fact, you don't need directly. So this one is something you don't need. It's there. If you want, you can overwrite it, but it's only for specific needs. And if you use debug auto wiring, it will provide you the aliases that are useful to you. And yeah, that could be useful in any situation where this could be, yeah, if you want to generate routes, you have the URL generator. If you need the router, you can have it by typing router interface, and so on. The request tag, and so on. Okay? Okay, let's do that. Yes, the example, I'm going to do the example that is in, just to show you another useful service. Sorry, I'm switching a lot. Okay, back to this highlight generator. Let's say now, I'm going to do something which is a sleep. So now we are adding overhead to our request. So when I call this, it's slow because generating the list of highlights takes 2 seconds. So that's something, okay, of course the sleep is not that useful, but it could be any computation, any retrieval on some API. So let's say this API call that gets this is slow, which we can simulate this way. There is a way to fix that, and this way is to cache the output of the call to the API that does that. Yes? So how can we do that? With a cache. And there is a cache in Symfony, which is provided by default. So which is, the interface is cache item pool interface. This might change in the future with some different, there are several interfaces that you can use with cache. I'm going to use debug auto wiring to show you a few others. We already displayed them, but so, okay, I just type hinted cache item pool interface, create the property, and now I have this here. I can use that on my service. Just back to the console to show you the output with when looking for cache. So there are 3 interfaces you can type in for. So cache item pool interface is the one we are using now. Another one which is called simple cache, and another one which is adapter interface. Which one should we choose? Any idea, any guide on this? Yep, no? So I would recommend you to type in against the most abstract interface. So in this case, it's likely that a PSR namespace, an interface in the PSR namespace is more abstract than an interface in the Symfony component cache namespace. Okay, because PSR is you know, a PSR is a standard that is created by the PHP Fig group, which is a group which provides generic interfaces. So PSR something is usually the most generic abstraction level that we have in the PHP world. So if you don't need any specific feature of the adapter interface, it's better to type in for the most abstract one, which is this one. Now, why choose this one over this one? It's just a matter of preference at this moment, because at the abstraction level, they are both standards. The difference is in the feature set provided by each interface. So let's use the auto wiring, let's use PHP Storm. So if we do cache, then this is the cache item pool interface. Cache item pool is a standard interface which defines methods with clear, commit, delete item, delete items, get item, get items, has item, save, save deferred, and that's it. Let me just change that. So it's called now cache interface. Where is it? I can see it. Yes, this one. So now I'm using the other one. And if I do that, now I have less, or I have different methods. It's not delete item, it's just delete. Delete multiple instead of delete items. Get multiple, has, get, set. So this interface is a bit simpler. That's why there is the simple word there. And we can, let's use it first. So let's say, sorry. Highlights. Let's call it, yes, default highlights. Okay, so now I'm getting this from, why is it gray? And use, okay, we don't care. This will return null if it doesn't exist in the backend. So if we say that this is null, then we go to the API, and then we do the heavy call. So then we do this. So we get this from the API, and after getting it from the API, we save it in the cache, because it's default. And it's highlights. So we just created a cache system for some API that is called there. So the life cycle is just that easy. So let me refresh that. The first time is slow, 2 seconds. And the second time is also slow. And the reason is not known yet. Sorry, which one?
Typo. The highlights is not spelled correctly.
This one?
Yeah. It's different from the set one.
Yes.
Actually, you remove the correct.
Yes. So I'm doing this better. Thank you. Okay. And now it is instant. So, okay, this is it. I want to show you the other interface just to see how we can use it. So the other interface, so this is simple cache, and simple cache, as you can see, is easy. You get null is a special value. You can also provide another default value. If this is what you want as a default value, you can provide it there, which means at this moment we would need to do that. But I'm not going null is okay as a default value for this. So now cache, I'm going to use the previous one, cache item pool interface. So now it doesn't work anymore, of course. So it's not get, it's get item. At this moment, highlights is not the array, it's an item. An item from PSR6, which is the standard where this interface exists. And let's see the interface. So we have get to get the actual value that is there, but we also have expers after, expers at, is hit. So now we have an actual object we can play with to change the duration of, let's say, the duration of the cache system. And if we want, so let's call it highlights item. And highlight would be this one. So now this would contain the highlights that are in the item, but this is too early because we did not check yet if this is in the cache. So let me do it proper way. The proper way might be better done this way. So highlights, item is hit, and there is a not there. So this means, did we get the value from the cache or not? Is hit or not? If it's hit, the answer is yes. If not, it means this is an empty item. So now the item, we know it's empty, so let's get the highlights from the API, and let's save the value. So the value now is, so the life cycle is a bit different, which means we set first the highlights we want to save on the item, and then we save the item itself. So if we do that, we set the value, it's written in the cache, and this one doesn't care anymore about if it's hit or not. There is always a value that is returned by get. So this does the same, and we still have caching enabled. Okay? So this is the cache interface, just a small introduction for it. If there is a recommendation on this one, it would be to use the most powerful interface, which is this one, because it provides you more features. You have more fine-grained control. It requires some boilerplate. As you can see, we have this item temporary object we need to deal with. In the end, it's not very longer to type, and it can be useful to have in the future at least, to have the features that are provided by the item object. I'm not going to spend more time on caching, except if you have questions about that. Let's move on. Or I think where the break is now, isn't it? Yep. Okay, so let's talk a bit. If you want, we have 5 minutes, 2 minutes, as much as you want. But if you have any question, if you want to hint me about what you want to do in the afternoon, yes?
Where is the cache stored by default?
Yes, good question. The cache is stored by default in the var. It's there. So it's in the file system. So there are many folders because Symfony uses the same cache pool or the file system to store internal things it needs to cache. But there is one of these pool is about, let's grep for cars, is about hours. So this one visibly. So we have this folder which contains items, and one of them is just the cached value. And this is something you can very easily change. So let me show you. I'm switching back to PHP Storm. So there is a hint and a default configuration that came with Flex, which is provided there. So this is something you might need to spend time on just to understand. So there is a framework.cache entry, and there you can configure the default, let's say there, the default caching system. So it means that I'm doing this. There are a few services that you can use as base cache providers. So one of them is Redis. So the code name is cache.adapter.redis. You provide it with a URL which will tell you, or which tells Symfony where Redis is located. I'm waiting 2 seconds. And now I can refresh. I already have a Redis service running on my machine. That's why it works. So I have a Redis server. I just implemented that. And now the pool and the file system is not used anymore for the Symfony application. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So if you have more questions about caching, we can spend some minutes on it. There is a way to define dedicated pools. So you can have a pool for forecast items, a pool for some API, another pool for another API. There is a configuration system for that. That's maybe not the topic today. If you have questions, you can come to me. I can answer them. Thank you. Do you have more questions or just before? I don't want. Okay, so come to me if you want.